Welcome to the We Raise the Stars and Stripes Over Japan podcast. This is episode number 3. My name is Mark Steven Schwartz, and it is both an honor and a privilege for me to read the diaries of Allied and American civilian prisoners of war interned in and around Kobe, Japan during the Great Pacific War, World War II. No portion of this story can be copied, duplicated, or used in reference in any way, directly or indirectly, without the expressed written permission of Mark Steven Schwartz, copyright 2019, all rights reserved. This episode continues with December 8th, 1941, from Bryant Sterling. Native children helped me unload the food. Met Bill Gordonier and Jack Taylor at Almagosa and gave them some pineapple and bologna. We headed back towards our camp. Met Bill Falvey coming up towards Almagosa in his pickup. Tells me to meet him at Frank Borja's house. Passed through Agate and stopped at Borja's house. Noticed his front room is filled with contractors' luggage. I drove back to the camp. Trucks and cars are fleeing at a mad pace from Sume. I'm warned to go directly back, but I kept driving on ahead. Heard planes overhead, so I pulled off the road under a tree to observe the planes bomb Aganya. I climbed a telephone pole to watch the bombing of Sume. Could hear the planes coming over Marine barracks. Could see the bombs dropping. Could see the pilot's body. Hear terrific venturing crash as the bombs strike its objective. Bombers disappear, then I head for camp. I met Clark Eldridge at the camp. He asked me to pick up a native woman to take her into Aganya. She has a brand new baby. She wants me to pick up her husband first. Walt Pleitner gives us some blankets. We unsuccessfully hunt for her husband for 1 hour. The woman decides to go to a farm halfway to Agate. On leaving Sume, I pick up my trunk at the camp. I drop the woman off at the camp. I headed for Almagosa, picking up natives on our way. We arrived okay and find Art Okapinti and Don Wallace. We ate a cold lunch served by John Petrovich. Art and I volunteered to go after kerosene at Aguada for the cook stove. We take the Ford truck. We didn't find any kerosene at Aguada, so we head for Aganya. We painted the headlights black and picked up one 52-gallon drum of gas. There wasn't any kerosene at the naval canteen, but we were directed to the naval warehouse by a native. We picked up 5 gallons of kerosene there. We headed for Almagosa Mountain. Aganya was blacked out. It was difficult to see the road due to the blacked out headlights, slits for light. We arrived at Almagosa. The Marines decided to take all trucks out of the vicinity, so a caravan of trucks headed for Agate. Reed Hubbard's pickup was in the lead. We arrived at Agate and drove to the left side of the road. We hid all trucks under trees. I put my trunk in Don Wallace's pickup. We headed back to Almagosa. Spent the night there with Wallace, Art Okapinti, and Red Thomas. Slept on the ground. The mosquitoes were terrible. Harold Brinkerhoff. I went down to Aganya with my men. We saw people with bundles on their backs, on bicycles, on jitneys piled high with household goods, and pulled carts stacked with every conceivable article, all streaming out of town in an endless caravan, everyone hurrying in all directions, but no panic. By noon, Aganya was practically deserted. The 10,000 inhabitants had evaporated into the jungle or gone to the small villages. I went home for lunch, but my house girl, Chong, had gone with the rest. I opened a can of beans and ate half a pineapple from the icebox. I reported to the Public Works office and was told to stand by. All heavy equipment was supposed to be loaded with dynamite, ready for destruction. There was a bulldozer and a crane not accounted for. I was sent out to locate them. I found their tracks leading out of town towards Sinahana. I found them and was relieved to find they were loaded and ready. At least one fellow had done his job. I reported back and stood around for further orders. Reed Hubbard. Japanese bombers attacked Sume, much bombing and machine gunning. By military order, we evacuated our camp, hauled all available food and supplies to the hills, and assisted the natives to leave. Bob Vaughn. When I returned from transporting injured men to the hospital, I started looking for our Pan Air people. We went as far back into the boonies as Max's car would go. Before heading out in the car, we had picked up a few supplies from the burning compound, the Pan Am Hotel and living quarters. We separated about 100 yards apart in the boonies. This was an idea to prevent all of us from being killed or captured. Charles F. Gregg, 12:30 p.m. Reported to Colonel McNulty, the U.S. Marine Corps commanding officer, that the radio was okay and could be on the air if he needed it. Coordinated plans with them to get all remaining food from the Pan Air warehouse and the cold storage container. Colonel McNulty and Major Spicer said to wait until late afternoon after the bombings were over. By that time, some contractors had appeared with a Marine sergeant and said they had instructed Al Hemeliff to release the food by order of Colonel McNulty. Captain Flournoy gave me permission to get any clothing, equipment, or supplies needed for the Pan American staff from the Marines warehouse. So he took a pair of pants, a shirt, some socks, a hat, and a belt with a canteen and machete for myself. Later outfitted George Conklin, Dick Arvidson, Jim Thomas, Fred Oppenborn, and Everett Penning in similar fashion. I found Jim Thomas at the Marine Barracks. He had opened the safe immediately after the first bombing and removed a significant amount of cash, checks, confidential papers, etc. I instructed him to burn all the papers immediately, which he did. I took the checks and cash. Supposedly, Max Brodowski had taken Grant Wells, George Blackett, and some others to Dade Beach near Agate. George Conklin and Dick Arvidson wanted to join them, so Jim Thomas, driving the station wagon, took them and the Cascow's boys and left for the beach. Bob Vaughn returned from taking the two Pan American Chamorro employees to the hospital. We took off the lifting crane from a truck, then drove around the Marine barracks, chaffering Marines and their supplies and equipment. During a lull in this activity, we stopped at the Pan American Buick and Bob repaired it. A battery wire had shorted. We then took the truck back into the boondocks and hid it. Bob and I then sat under a tree in the boondocks and counted the cash and made a record of it and the checks, destroying them prior to surrendering, in order that the Japs could not trace the distribution of money, approximately $500 in cash and $250 in checks. Bob Vaughn and I then returned to the Pan American compound in the Buick and loaded all the stores left in the reefer into the car. We found the hotel kitchen and crew mess completely destroyed by bombs and fire. The percussion of the bombs had broken the walls of most of the rooms, and the plyboard roof had been broken. Furniture in the old wing of the hotel was also aflame, but as all fire extinguishers had already been emptied by someone else, all we could do was throw out the furniture that was burning. 2:30 p.m. Later that day, another bombing raid occurred, and an incendiary bomb finished the hotel within 30 minutes. After leaving the hotel, Vaughn and I looked through the warehouse, building number 205, and found almost all the food gone. We loaded what edibles there were, together with medical supplies from Max's shop and my Air Express packages for the folks and Polly, into the truck. With this load, we started out to get together with the rest of the Pan American fellows at Dade Beach. We stopped, told Colonel McNulty where we were going, got some more Marine clothing, and headed out. Dean Brunton. In the afternoon, we received another raid aimed at the naval radio station. The Japs came back with a dozen planes, dived almost onto their target, dumped 34 explosive bombs, never scored a hit. Harold Brinkerhoff. Eyewitnesses said the Pan American Hotel was a mass of wreckage, and one Standard Oil tank was set afire. Tonight I'm going to sleep in my own house. Where I'll sleep tomorrow will have to take care of itself. Charles F. Gregg. 6:30 p.m. After 4 hours of searching along the beach from Agate back to Sume, we finally found that the fellows had gone to the uplands of the Almagosa Springs region. During this time, I gave some food to Joe Camacho and also the Christmas presents for the folks in Pauley. Driving through Agate and up to Almagosa, we passed a regular exodus of Chamorros in old trucks, Fords, bull carts, and afoot, hauling and carrying all they possessed. It was a pitiful sight to see these people hurrying along, driven by a fear of something they could not understand, bewildered, crying, with horror written in their eyes and faces. At the top of the hill, we met most of the contractors' men, Lieutenant Dean Morgan, some Marines, and at the end of the road, our own Pan American men, except George Blackett. The road ended at a giant bluff of a mountain. Deep tropical green grew on all sides of the boondocks. The contractors had worked most of the day with their big trucks, hauling canned goods and food up to this area. The supplies were dumped off the trucks in big heaps on the side of the road, later to be covered with palm leaves for camouflage. We ate a hurried meal of a slice of bread and a can of beans before darkness was upon us. After dark, Max Brodowski took his car, and while accompanied by Al Hamiloff, George Conklin, Bob Vaughn, and Grant Wells, returned to the Pan American compound for clothes. Jim Thomas, Dick Arvidson, and I took the Buick and returned to the Marine barracks. Dick Arvidson and Jim Thomas put the radio station on the air. Dick Arvidson. About 4 or 5 members of the Pan Am staff returned by truck to the Sume base to carry out certain activities in anticipation of a Japanese invasion of the island. As a member of this group, my responsibility was to attempt to activate the radio station to listen on the various radio circuits and possibly make contact with some other station to advise of our situation. Basic power in the area had been lost due to the bombing raid. Therefore, I activated the emergency power generator and listened on the various communication frequencies, which I found to be extremely active, mainly the Japanese communications, probably between naval vessels in the area. I was unable to establish contact with any other station. As a final activity, I did listen to some news from the United States on shortwave and was able to understand in some detail, for the first time, exactly what had happened and what the extent of the war activity was. Charles F. Gregg. I contacted Colonel McNulty, who had no messages to send, and advised us not to transmit any messages for fear of Japanese interception. Closed the radio station and took both cars to the Pan American quarters for clothes, water and bottles, etc. Jim Thomas and I went through the office again and removed all flight books, operations manuals, and data on airplanes' operations and procedures, etc., later burned same. We also collected clothing at the Chamorro maintenance men's quarters. The Pan American compound was a wreck. Hotel burned down, crew quarters gone, bomb holes everywhere, and an eerie red light thrown over by all the burning of the oil tank. After loading up, we returned to Almagosa. By the time we had unloaded the Buick,